Hey, I'm Pat, and in this video I will be explaining module scripts and pretty much how they work. I'm going to be going in depth a little bit on how exactly they work and explaining them a little bit better than I think most people have. I don't think there's many videos on module script anyways either, so we're just going to go over them. So, the first thing about a module script is what it is. So obviously we have a server script and a local script, and we also have a module script, and most likely you've probably only used server scripts and local scripts up to this point, but once you make a module script, you'll notice it gives you the starting code instead of like the print from your other scripts. It gives you local module equals table, and then we return the table that we defined, which is kind of different. And it's also kind of weird because we are returning without a function. Now in Roblox Studio, I also think it's actually in Lua as well, all the scripts are actually considered functions. So this script here, everything inside of it is actually called a function. Like everything inside of it's actually inside of a function, if you want to think of it that way, right? That's actually how it is. And when Roblox runs, right, it'll execute the function that the script is storing, pretty much, is like the basic way of thinking about it. So the way a module script works is it's just the same, it's a function, right? Except we can decide when we call the function using a global function called require. And what this does is it will just run a module script. And say if our module script returns something, we can store the result of that return into a variable, just like we would calling any other function, right? It's literally just us executing a function, and you can think of all the code inside of a module script as a function. And now a module script, just like any other function, can return anything you want. So you can return a number, you can return a function if you want. I know a lot of people like to do this where they return functions, but I just kind of find it weird where you return a function, but you can do that. But usually what I do is I return a table, and my table will usually have multiple functions inside of it. So if you didn't know already, you can store functions inside of tables. We're going to go over that in just a second, but for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an index inside of our table, and we're just going to call this test equals hi. And now what we'll do is we'll go over to here and we'll reference our module script. Require script.parent.module script. And then once we do tab, you'll see once we index our tab, it will say test. It knows what this is returning, and it tells us what's inside of it. So it already knows that test is inside of it, and you can even see it tells you that it's a string right here. So my brain is failing. So what we'll do is we'll just print test, just to show you that it's actually like a thing or whatever. So we'll run it real quick. Run. You'll see it prints hi, just like we expected it to. So that's kind of the basics of how a module script works, right? We can actually call it multiple times as well. If we wanted to, we could print inside the module scripts, like print hello, and we could require it. We don't even need to store the result in anything. In this case, we can just require it multiple times. We don't need this anymore, right? Now what I'll do is if I run it, you'll see it prints hello only once. What? Alright, maybe I'm tripping or something. I'm pretty sure you can call them multiple times. Maybe you can't call them multiple times in one script. That's actually something I've never tested, which is kind of weird, considering all the things I've done with module scripts. But anyways, you can see it ran the code inside of it just like it would any other script. So that's actually something you should keep in mind when using module scripts, because it can actually cause memory leaks, I'm pretty sure. Because if you have, say we do game.players.player added, and then we connect that to a function, now every time that we require this function or this module script, it'll make another connection onto players added, I'm pretty sure, which could cause a memory leak. Even though maybe not being able to require it in the same script, you can require it in other scripts as well. and it will call it again, just the same. Something to also note about a module script is to say, if we modified the value of test inside this script and then printed it in another script, you'll see that test is actually actually going to be the updated value that we gave it. So if we do tab.test, and we're just going to add an index called test into it anyways, test equals hi. Now what we can see is inside of here, this module is actually empty. But if we go ahead and add another script, I'm going to call it script 2 just so we don't get confused. I believe this is script 2, yeah. Now what we'll do is we'll require script.parent.module script, and we'll wait maybe 1 second. And then what we'll do is print, we'll print our tab.test. Now this is going to be a little trippy, I'm sure, but once we do this, you'll see it prints hi. Now you can see obviously hi isn't in this module script, but we add it inside this script, and then this script recognizes that it was changed and it prints out hi. You can see inside the module script that we modified the contents of this table. Now you might be wondering why that is. I don't know if I've gone over this before, but tables are not actually stored the same way variables are, or like a number would be, for example. So if we stored 5 in this table, it'd be storing 5 differently than it'd be storing a table. A table is actually a reference to a string of memory locations, pretty much, because a number is obviously only needs one memory location, right? But if we have multiple numbers, then we're going to need multiple memory locations for each of those numbers. So a table is actually a group of memory locations. Usually they're one after each other. So the reason that we can't have, like, you know, say just storing a table inside of one memory location is because it's not exactly like one memory location, right? I'm pretty sure that makes sense. I might be wrong in that. I'm not 100% sure what I'm talking about, but I do know the rest. Like, I know what I'm talking about for the rest of things. So the table is actually like a reference to a memory address, kind of like how when we store a part inside a variable, we're referencing that part. We're not actually storing that part exactly, we're referencing a part. We're pretty much storing the reference to that part. So if we were to make a change to that part, other scripts would see that change as well. It's kind of the same thing for this table, where this table is being stored in one location and all the other scripts can access it and see that it's being changed. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. I remember when I first learned module scripts, I thought that was how it works, but then somebody else told me otherwise, so I was like, oh, that's stupid. And I started using module scripts like the wrong way for like a long time until I realized, wait, that person had no idea what he was talking about, and I was actually right the first time. But you know, it happens. So this video is getting kind of it's not too long yet, but I want to go over functions and tables. Obviously that's like one of the biggest parts of module scripts. That's what makes them really useful, is being able to call functions and store functions inside module scripts, which will ultimately help clean up your scripts and keep them from being like 2 billion lines long. You can put functions inside module scripts that you might be reusing in other scripts as well. Say like if you have a admin system and you have a specific way where you check to see if a player has permissions to do a command, you might need to say store that function inside of a module script, so that way you can call it check players permissions across multiple scripts, if that makes sense, right? And there's other use cases that I can't think of off the top of my head, but you get it. So we're gonna actually do function. You're gonna notice that I don't do local function, and that's because in this case the function actually has to be global. And then what we'll do is module dot, so this is setting our index in the module to whatever you put after it. So this is going to be the name of our function after this. We're just going to call this test function, and we're going to give it our parameter list right here with these parentheses. And now obviously we can get parameters inside of here. So for example, we can do param1, say, and then we can take param1 or we could return param1 times 2 or something like that, just like multiply the parameter or whatever. It's not a very useful function, but you get the idea. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do tab, and now you'll see once I do dot, you'll see it shows test function, and it also tells us parameter. It tells us that it has a parameter and the name of the parameter. You can see also shows a return type and data type for the parameter, but obviously we haven't defined types for those, so it's kind of say any. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass it 3, and then obviously we're going to want to do something with the result or what it returns, so we're going to go ahead and print that out. So now we'll do an output, and you'll see we run it. I kind of did the wrong thing, but you see it prints 6 and then prints nil. Obviously this isn't going to work anymore, so we're just going to delete this script. We don't need it now. But you can see that worked like that. So we could have multiple functions inside of here that could be used to clean up our code, things like that. This is also very useful for creating objects with object-oriented programming. It's obviously not something I'm going to be able to go over in this video alone. I'm going to go over that over a course of multiple videos. I'm not just going to do one video on object-oriented programming. I want to do videos on pretty much everything about it, as far as like inheritance and polymorphism, you know, all the fun stuff. But that's pretty much it. That's kind of how module scripts work. There's nothing too complicated here. If you wanted to, we could actually do a colon like this. You don't really have a specific use for this right now, but we can actually do it like that, which is a method. So we can give it a method, and you can see it autofills for us, and it'll work just the same actually. Go ahead and run it. You'll see it works actually the same, so there's not really much of a difference right now that I'm going to go over, but that's pretty much how that works. Another thing to take note is your module script does actually have to return something. So if we actually remove this and say we try and run it now, I'm pretty sure we should get an error. Yeah, module code did not return exactly one value. That's also something I didn't talk about, is you can only return one value. So you can't return a tuple, which I don't know if I've gone over returning tuples, but obviously you could return multiple values inside of a function, but in this case that won't work. So we could return multiple values inside this function obviously, but we can't return multiple values here with a tuple. So you would have to use a table. In most cases you're going to be using a table for a module script. Module scripts are also very useful for things like configs. So like if you want to have configuration for scripts to easily change values, like you just open up a module script, change some values, and it'll easily update like across a bunch of scripts, things like that. It makes it a lot more simpler than, you know, having to manually open up the script and like go through it and try and change values, or even like sort through the variable list and try and find values to change. Here you can have it separated, and you could split it up with comments and make it all organized and things like that if you really wanted to. I can't really recall like much else about module scripts, as far as there's not really much to know about them unless you know like object-oriented programming really. So they're kind of boring otherwise, but they are pretty useful. So as far as now, I think I'm going to go ahead and show you a script that I made, just like a very simple script for going over the idea of how you could use a module script inside of your game. So you'll see I don't have a leader stat. If I go into players, you can see there's no like values linked to my players. This is all like default Roblox scripts, default Roblox GUI here. There's nothing under my player. I don't have an attribute set, but if I go ahead and go to the output, and I click on this part, you'll see it says money 10, and it also says skins nothing, and it says instance whatever. That's just my player, right? But if I click this more times, you can see I keep incrementing that pretty much. So now if I go ahead and stop playing the game, I'll go ahead and show you, or actually I'll just tell you to try and make that. So that's kind of the idea. Obviously I'm storing my data inside of a module script, and I'm updating it through a click detector for this part, and I'm just printing it out now. But for future reference, you know, you could obviously have it stored inside of a GUI for display or something like that. Not stored inside of a GUI, but like, you know, fire a remote event to the client for display. And I also just realized I forgot to go over something very important with module scripts. Hopefully you didn't already click off, but something to note about a module script is when you require it on the server, it will run on the server, and when you require it on the client, it will run on the client. Sounds pretty easy to understand, right? So unless you require a module script in a local script, the client won't have access to that module script or the contents of that module script. And another thing to take note is, per se, we're obviously editing data inside of a module script here in this, right? It wouldn't replicate to the client. So if the client now required our module script, it would not see that we have 210 money. It'd probably just think, it actually wouldn't even see our player inside this table. It would just think it's an empty table. So it doesn't replicate across. So the server obviously can see changes that the server made, and the client can obviously see changes that its own client made, but it can't see across. So even if you do it on the server, the client still won't see it, and same vice versa. But the idea is, I want you to make a script where you have like module script and you store all your players' data inside of there, so that way you could easily access it through other scripts. And this is actually very useful whether you think so or not, because instance values are actually pretty stupid. Alright, I'm calling you out on your instance values. I hate instance values, guys. I'm being honest right now. So this is an instance value, right? A number value, a string value, whatever. The things they use for leader stats. A lot of people like to use these for storing data inside of a player, inside like a folder or something. And personally, I think that's actually pretty messy, and I think it's inefficient. If you think about it, what we have here is we have a whole instance, and it has a bunch of properties here, and we could give it attributes if we want, but think about how much memory and resources this instance itself is taking up compared to, say, just a table with like a string index and a number. That has like very small amounts of data. Now this probably also is very small and is probably represented a very similar way, but it has extra fucking hell. It has extra properties here, and it can be kind of messy and annoying to use. Whereas if you just use a module script, it could be very easy to use, as well as data saving. If you wanted to, you could just set async and get async the table. It's very easy to save and get, or set and get like the table through a data store or something like that. Whereas for instance values, you'd have to like loop through each folder and like save them to a table, and then save it when a table it's pretty much already set up to be saved. And once you load it, you just have to set it, pretty much. It's like very simple. Also, what else? There's not much else. Just take note that nobody really uses instance values on a professional level. They're either using module scripts and maybe some attributes as a mix, because attributes are pretty useful as well. But instance values are kind of ugly and nobody likes them. I'm going to be honest with you. So the idea, yeah, I already went over this, right? So I'm going to actually go over how I did it now. It's not very complicated, but I got this script called data setup inside server script service, and all this does is it gets the player and also gets our module script, which I have inside server storage just because it makes sense for it to be there. It's organized like that instead of storing it in here or replicated storage, thing like that. Because replicated storage is really meant for things that are being replicated. This isn't being replicated, so it makes sense for it to be stored here, even though it doesn't need to be protected from exploiters, but it just makes sense, so it's organized like that. And then we wait for a player to join, and once they join, we just add them to our table, which stores all of our players, or our module script, if you will, using their player instance as an index, and then we set it to a table, which will have all of our values like money, skins, unlockables, you know, whatever you want to have here, you can also add. And then once they leave, we actually set it to nil. This is actually pretty important because we don't want to have a bunch of unused indexes in our table. that actually be very inefficient for managing memory. So that actually technically could be a memory leak if you really wanted to call it one, but just make sure that, you know, if you're doing something like this, that you set it to nil once they leave. You gotta clean everything up, or else if the server runs for like a while, it could end up slowly getting laggy, things like that. You can see our module script completely empty, nothing in here. And then our part, which just has the click detector on a script in it. Usually I wouldn't do this. I'd probably put my script inside a server script service and manage it differently, but it's just an example here. So we listen for a click detector to be clicked, we get the player. We also already have the module script required here, so we can access it. And then we just find the player's index in their module script and change their money value by 10. Pretty simple. And then we just print it out so we can see that it's actually being updated. And you can see this is a lot simpler than if we had to do like player.stats.money.value plus equals 10. I mean, it's just kind of stupid like that. And if you want in the future, you can incorporate something like this with object-oriented programming to make it even better, and it will help with replicating to the client, things like that, and it will make this way more powerful even. So I'll obviously go over that in a future video, but that's it for this video. Hopefully this helped you understand module scripts on a better level. They really aren't that complicated. They are kind of simple. Just a lot of people don't get like a good explanation on them. I don't think there's many videos on them, so I think that is very hurtful for people figuring out how to use them and things like that. But obviously that's my goal here, is to try and make it easier for people to learn. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully it helped. Thanks for watching. Join my Discord if you want, link in the description. Alright, see ya.